Circulation Part 1. Blood vessels, the road around the body. Some basics. We have a closed circulation system that is a circuit of tubes that carries blood from our heart to our cells and back to our heart again. The force of the heartbeat, or the blood pressure, pushes blood through the first of two types of blood vessels. Then our muscles contract, bringing it back to our heart. We have four main types of vessels we're going to talk about today: the arteries, the veins, the lymphatic vessels, and capillaries. Arteries have strong elastic walls that adapt to high pressure, and they bring blood from our heart to the rest of the body. We have three layers. The inner layer is a smooth endothelium. It's smooth to help prevent blood clots. Our middle layer is smooth muscle fibers. That is a thick layer that it helps with connective tissue, and it helps force the blood out into the rest of the body. This helps control vasodilation, which is dilation, which is increasing in size, and vasoconstriction, which is the decreasing in size of our arteries. Our outer layer is a thin connective tissue that attaches the arteries to their surrounding areas to keep them in place. We then branch into much smaller vessels called arterioles. They have the same composition, but are much smaller. So again, we see this very smooth, silky inner endothelium layers to prevent any clots. Our thick, smooth muscle layer that allows it to dilate or contract. And then our connective tissue on the outside to keep it in place. Veins carry blood back to the heart. Venules are the small forms of veins that are connected to capillaries. We have three layers once again, but the middle layer is not as developed. With many veins, we have a two-leaf valve system that closes if blood moves away from the heart and keeps it from moving backwards in our veins. Typically, these are found in limbs. So in our artery, we see our smooth endothelium layer. We see our really thick middle layer, which is our smooth muscle, and then our outer connective tissue. In veins, we do see a smooth endothelial layer, but the smooth muscle is not as pronounced, it's not as developed. But we do see these valves here. They're basically one-way valves. What happens is that when we're trying to push our blood up through our legs against gravity, or push it up through our arms to get back to our heart, we need some help. So we actually have the muscles on either side of our veins, and it basically pushes and squeezes our veins together. Now again, if you look here, what happens to the water once I put pressure on the outside? Well, it moves up the bottle. This is exactly what happens with our blood. As the vein gets constricted or puts pressure on it, the blood moves up and then is trapped by these one-way valves here, so that when the muscles relax, the blood can't flow backwards. This helps us overcome gravity and any of the forces that we need to push our blood back up our bodies to our heart. Lymphatic veins or lymphatic vessels. They're about the same size as arteries with the smooth muscle center. They carry lymph, which is the liquid portion of the blood minus the large proteins, back to the veins. We also have lymph capillaries that are much smaller that are found in our digestive system that help with absorption of glycerol and fatty acids. Capillaries are the junctions between arterioles and venules. They are the smallest diameter of blood vessels, and they're semi-permeable, which means they allow certain substances through. They have very small slits between those endothelial cells that overlap that allow lymph, or the liquid portion of the blood, minus those large proteins, out to the surrounding cells. Precapillary sphincters, which is basically that rubber band, controls the amount of blood flow into the capillaries. So again, we have a sphincter over here that allows a certain amount of blood flow to move into this capillary. We see our atrials, our capillaries, and then our venules, then back to our veins. Now, again, in these capillaries, we're going to have some of the fluid of the blood, or the lymph, come out into the surrounding cells. Now, this allows nutrients to get to those surrounding cells, and oxygen, and any of the vital things carried by the blood. Now, how does this actually work? We've got two forces, hydrostatic pressure and osmotic pressure. Remember, osmotic is going to be talking about the water pressure, water wanting to move from a high concentration to a low concentration. On the arterial half, which is the first half, these two pressures force out the liquid portion of the blood, known as plasma, minus the large proteins. So when we subtract the large proteins from plasma, we call it lymph, to flow out of the capillaries into the surrounding tissue. Now this flow is about 12 millimeters pressure. This is good because those cells need all of this nutrient that is carried by our blood. Now the returning portion, our venule half, due to those two pressures again, the hydrostatic pressure and the osmotic pressure, the lymph that is leaked out on that arterial side flows back into the capillaries on the venule side at 8 millimeters pressure. Now, wait a second. We have a problem. We have 12 going out, and we've got 8 coming back in. That means 1/3 of that fluid stays in the tissue. Now, if that fluid builds up and nothing is done with that fluid in the tissue, we see swelling, known as edema. To prevent this swelling, those 4 millimeters of fluid that is left over is absorbed by the lymph capillaries. The lymph vessels, or the lymph capillaries, take that extra amount of fluid and take it back to the veins. So again, here we have fluid going out. Over here in our venules, we have fluids going back in. And then what is not shown in this picture is our lymph vessels that take that leftover fluid and take it back to our veins. Blood pressure is the force exerted on the inner walls of the blood vessels, more typically referred to as arterial blood pressure, because we're talking about the pressure put onto the arteries that is going from our heart into the body. Our maximum pressure is when our ventricular constriction occurs, or the ventricle side of our heart forces the blood out into the rest of the body. It is known as systolic pressure. When that ventricle is relaxed, we have the lowest amount of pressure, and that is called diastolic pressure, and that is around 80 millimeters pressure. Again, we see diastolic where there's no constriction of our ventricle, and we see systolic when this ventricle is compressed, trying to force that blood to the rest of the body. We have a systemic circuit from our heart going to the rest of the body back to our heart, and we have a pulmonary circuit that goes from the heart to the lungs back to the heart. Inside of our lungs, we also have capillaries, because we have to actually have that blood carbon oxygen exchange. And so we see our capillaries inside of our lungs, and we have the exchange of carbon dioxide for oxygen. Increased pressure. If we have increased pressure, we can see two different things occur. If we see increased pressure in the veins, then we have varicose veins, which are known as those bluish spider veins that you might see on the legs. And this is due to abnormal dilation, which, remember, dilation means going to increase in size. Again, this is due to gravity forcing our veins to enlarge. Then we also have hypertension, which is a persistently elevated arterial pressure, so putting a lot of pressure on our arteries that move away from the heart. And this can contribute to arterial sclerosis, which is plaque buildup in those arteries. If plaque builds up too far, it can actually stop blood flow, and that can be a problem. Again, varicose veins are those blue spider veins that we see here, And this is due to an abnormal dilation, and our one-way valves don't work as well. So here are some questions that you might want to go back through and answer and see if your notes can answer. Well, have a great day.